know, normally, because you've listened to the podcast, which is why I asked you to come on. But normally the device I use is, hey, mom's listening. Tell mom who you are. Mom actually knows who you are.
That's true. I saw her last night.
Exactly. You were cool to fly in for that because mom and dad really love seeing you.
I was happy to do it. I was just, when you have a chance to see everybody together like that, and you just jump at it. So it worked out. Wish I could have brought the family. I think they would have loved to see my kids.
Yeah,
but,
no, that's your man and your woman. I mean, they're not kids anymore.
That's true. Scary stuff.
So to level set for the audience, 60-year wedding anniversary, Charles and Sally Yates. And we had a big party at the house. And, mom and dad tried to buy that house back in the early 70s. And so this is kind of like fulfilling mom's dream by me buying that house and her getting to have the party there.
Well, it's kind of magical with those huge trees out front with the lights hanging down and the stage and everything. It was nice. Well done.
It was really nice. So the other thing I'll level set with the audience is Zane's, of all the people that were contenders for the fifth Yates brother, I think you won the Lifetime Achievement Award there. We'll give you the title. Chris Christenick may have had a little claim to it early days, but no, I think it's all yours.
Awesome.
So tell the audience the background, your background, because I know it.
Yeah. So I'm an engineer, went to Rice with you. That's where we all met. Out of school, I went to work for Intel, and I've been at Intel for 28 years. Done all kinds of different things at Intel, from engineering stuff to running business stuff. I led our desktop PC business for a number of years. I lived in Taiwan for a couple of years. A lot of the IT world sort of goes through Taiwan. Most of the world's computers and things are made by Taiwanese companies, and that was a huge experience for me. I spent also a couple of years as Intel was trying to build a silicon foundry business. So that's where we manufacture chips for other companies, which is kind of the usual way the industry works. Intel's usually a little bit unique in the industry these days, that we still both design and manufacture our own chips. And after doing that for a little while, I went to our data center group, and I've been there for a little over 60 years. I managed our engineering and architecture teams, developing new Xeon servers, and worked closely with the big cloud service providers and big OEMs like Dell and Amazon and companies like that to build computer infrastructure. One of the things Intel has traditionally done a lot with is industry leadership things like building standards. And my team did a lot of that kind of work. So when you use like a USB port, we kind of started that, and a lot of the work done there. And we were active in creating Ethernet and PCI Express and all these kind of technologies. And as we've moved into the kind of big data center world, we do a lot of development of new standards, working closely with the industry. And so that's been an exciting part of the job. But I just got a new job.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So 2 months ago, we did a big reshuffling. And so I've moved back to the business side. So I'm leading product management for our server and AI products. So like the Xeon processors, our Gaudi AI accelerators and stuff like that.
So you're cool to come on the podcast because I want to hear everything about data centers and AI because at the end of the day, that's going to take a lot of power. I mean, these stats better than I do, and I've said it a lot on the podcast, so the audience knows it. But 1950 to 2000, electricity usage in America was up 15x, right? I mean, you just built a lot of really cool stuff that ran off electricity, AC, dishwashers, the computer, etc. 2000 to, let's call it almost today, electricity usage in America was pretty flat. And it was because the machines got a lot more efficient and all that. And now everybody's talking about, 2045, we'll be using 3x the electricity. All of this is data center driven, AI driven type stuff. So
Don't forget the EVs.
And the EVs, yes, the EVs. Although I don't know that that's going to take. We'll debate EVs.
But I think the
later.
people that are forecasting that big increase are assuming a big chunk for EVs too. Not just
Yeah.
but data center and AI is a big part of that forecast. Absolutely.
Yeah. So how are you going to power all that? Because I mean, I feel like where we are is I was listening to a podcast with the head of MISO, which is the electric district, kind of Midwest, and he said they used to have 15% excess generating capacity. They may have 2% now. Feels like we're all tapped out. So how are we going to power all that?
I think it's a great question. And I think
like I have no idea.
well, I think there's a few things to think about. I'm really interested in that period we just finished, like you said, so how did we do it before, right? And in IT and, just the last 10 years, we went through this cloud computing revolution and computing capability, expanded by about 500% in terms of, the amount of capacity, especially in cloud computing. But electricity consumption by data centers actually didn't grow very much. It's like single digits.
The stat I've heard is computing power in the cloud was up 10x over the last decade, but electric usage for all of it was up maybe 10%. So basically what you're saying.
And there's some researchers that have gone and tried to break that down and sort of how we got to where we are, because I think it's good to understand what worked well so we can think about what might work well in the future. And there were really three pieces to that story. One is like just Moore's law, right? Chips get dramatically better, right? We're able to put dramatically more computing power in one chip, and therefore one server can do the work of, wait 5, 6, 7 years, and one server will do the work of 10. And so it does get dramatically more energy efficient. But that alone doesn't explain the success. The other big change in the world was this kind of movement into these very large scale data centers, how we call hyperscale data centers. And you'll see there's a lot of them in Oregon where I live, because Oregon's kind of a great place for this kind of thing. You have cheap green electricity, you've got great fiber optic infrastructure, you got the proper property tax laws, and it all works together to make this a great place. But you see these facilities, and it makes like the biggest Costco you've ever seen look like a small box, and there'll be a substation on one side of the building, and there'll be all these cooling towers on the other side of the building, right? There's a big industrial scale. It's like a digital factory. But those kinds of facilities are far more efficient. So the one of the metrics they use in industry is called PUE, power usage effectiveness. So how much of power is sort of wasted that isn't actually computing something, in the facilities, and those numbers have improved, dramatically. So that's kind of one piece. A second piece was a shift in technology called virtualization. And virtualization is where...
Yeah, can we go back to point one real quick? Just that more efficient, is that in effect cooling better? I mean, is that the big driver?
Cooling is a big part of it, but delivering the power is also a big part of it. So you waste a fair amount of electricity in how you get the electricity to the device.
Okay.
Because you have to go through various power conversions and distribution, and so there's all kinds of losses. And then there's also when you manage at a very large fleet level, you're able to do clever things to utilize the capability more and more efficiently. So it works, but cooling is a big part of it. Like a lot of the different parts of the world, you have different climates, so you get different solutions in different places. But like in Eastern Oregon, one of the benefits is a very dry climate, and so if you have access to a water source, you evaporate water, and so they may consume a great deal of water, but they can be very energy efficient. So you think like a swamp cooler in your house is much more efficient than an air conditioner. But if you live in Houston, you're not going to get very far with the swamp cooler.
Right.
But but things like that. And there's a lot of things in the future that can make that also a lot more efficient.
Gotcha. All right, back to number two.
Yeah, sorry. So my big two is a big change was what's called virtualization, and maybe the easiest way to describe that is instead of having, you know, you sort of separate the software version of a computer from the hardware version of a computer. So traditionally, like think of your laptop, there's Windows is running your laptop or something, and that's running on a particular microprocessor with a particular chunk of memory. With virtualization, we're able to create a digital version of the computer on the computer. So I don't know if that makes any sense. So it's a virtual version of a compute instance. And so what you're interacting with in the cloud is a virtual computer, not actually the direct, metal on the chip itself. It's a software, almost like an emulation of a computer. And learning how to do that very well and very efficiently was a big technology development, 20 years ago. And that became widely deployed. And that lets, when you can decouple the usage of the computer from the specific one, you can manage the resources way more efficiently. I can have more than one computer on a server. I can move them around if I need to do maintenance. You can do all kinds of magic. And so you don't need nearly as much hardware if you can efficiently utilize the resources with this virtualization technology. This turned into a big deal, and like most all of the digital services are delivered that way today. There are applications where people do what you'll hear in the industry. People talk about bare metal servers, and bare metal is when you don't necessarily use the virtualization. You like rent the actual metal, the actual hardware from the provider, and then you do with it what you want, which may still include virtualization, by the way.
Right.
But the most services are delivered through these virtualization, and it's been a massive, sea change in things. So between those three things, this innovative software technology, virtualization, software and hardware, but there were things we had to do in the chip to make that work. This big hyperscale infrastructure and just chips getting better. When you put those three things together, that's why you were able to grow so incredibly much capability without really growing electricity consumption all that much. And so that's like a big success story. But then, now the world changed. We're AI is a far more computationally intensive activity. And so you're doing things on a kind of on a much bigger scale, much more complex machines. And consuming a great deal of power as you process just a huge amount of data. And so now we are seeing this kind of inflection point, and the question is kind of what happens next, right? And I think there are some analogies, right? I think as electricity becomes scarce, people have to become smarter about it. And I think as the economic demands on more electricity become stronger, people have to respond to that with more capacity. And then there will be some, I think, market forces that cause that to balance out over time. And I think one of the things we don't know is what is the economic value of large AI models. So they're amazing. I was playing with ChatGPT this week that came out, and it's amazingly cool what it does. But exactly how are people going to make money with it? How much money are they going to make with these technologies? And then how much are they willing to pay for the power, right? To to drive them. But you see big players in the industry investing significantly. You see utilities, I think, starting to think about investing in AI. You see things globally happening, in the Middle East and other places where people are thinking about this equation of industrial level AI farms and and coupling that with investments in electricity generation together. Some providers have even looked at these small scale nuclear power plants. So if the one vision might be that if the cloud computing era was marked by these giant warehouses with a substation on one side, maybe the future, instead of a 100 megawatt facility with a substation, it's a 3 gigawatt facility with its own nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
So
And that's not
I don't know. I
that's
don't
not
know. I don't
crazy.
know if the bigger infrastructure than that has been built in other industries. So it's not impossible to imagine if there is demand for it. And if you think about, I don't know what a nuclear power plant costs, but it's probably 10, $20 billion. But the capital expenditures today and some of these big players are on that order already, right? So if this market truly, if we're at the beginning of a big expansion, you can imagine there's enough capital room, if you will, for some big investments, and that'll be a global thing.
Because The way, so I'm going to give a speech next week to a company that's a gas storage company. So they have their user conference, and it's in effect a bunch of natural gas players. And the whole point of my speech is going to be, hey guys, you got to stop thinking about selling natural gas and start thinking about selling electrons in some way, shape, or form because of what you just said. I mean, if tech decides we want to go nuclear, and there are a whole host of reasons on why you'd want to do it. I mean, the cost is all regulatory. And if anybody has the ends to change regulatory stuff in DC, it's big tech, right? And so if they come up with a design for a small nuclear device of some sort and get regulations put in their favor, you can do it pretty cheap. I mean, the French did it pretty cheap in the 70s, and their electricity costs are on average or below average for Europe. So they can do, and that was the French back in the 70s. We're much better at manufacturing today, and we're not the French. But no, so I think the natural gas provider has to figure out some way to, in effect, be the crack dealer and give the crack and get technology addicted to natural gas powered electricity, or else they may lose out to it, to exactly the setup you just said. Nuclear reactor right here, power this.
Yeah, I'll throw another thing out for you to think about, because there's maybe two halves to the AI equation. AI computing is kind of a different paradigm than traditional computing, because you train a model and then you use a model, and those are two different activities. And normal computing, traditional computing, it's happening in real time. You ask the computer to do something with a computer program, it works on it, does some calculations, and gives you an answer. And how fast that answer comes back is important to you. And getting that answer to your end user, like when you're using an app on your phone, right? You're very interested in getting an instantaneous response. That's not happening. A lot of that is not happening on your phone. It's happening in the cloud somewhere. With AI computing, when you make the model, you train the model. That's a very slow and expensive, laborious process. But then using the model is separated. So that being kind of two computing steps. So the training part of the model can actually happen kind of anywhere at any time. A big model might take weeks or months to train, and you might train that model in a totally different geography than where you use the model. And if the computer crashes more often, it isn't that big a deal. Or if you had to slow it down because power costs will go up and down, you might be able to manage that. And in the using of the model, we call it inference. The inference part of the model is where you already built the model, and now you take that model and put it in computers that are much closer to where the users are going to be. And so then you do care about the quality of service and how quickly things come back. So this training step is really interesting because it doesn't have to be in any particular place. It can be
right
next to the power plant. It could be, well, other than this, regulation becomes a big deal if you think about the data sovereignty laws. So the data needs to be somewhere, and there's very large amounts of data required to train a big model. And so you need to be where the data is. You need to be where the power is cheap. And that's kind of interesting. So what's going to happen in the Middle East? What's going to happen in China? What's going to happen in Europe or the United States might be strongly affected by utility policies, energy policies, and data sovereignty policies. And data sovereignty policies and energy policies may need to go together to see sort of where you're going to do this kind of all important, training stuff. But if you can't get the end product to the user through the inference step, which might also have regulatory constraints at some point, then training it, some far off location may not make sense, or maybe for nuclear power, you put that in some, remote location, or if you're, anyway, it's a different paradigm than maybe the infrastructure that we built in the past because of that. And it'll be interesting where it goes.
No, I mean, I don't know which ones are which, but I've read about, in Japan, you have certain rules on how you're allowed to train the model, what's fair use, what's not. So far in America, we've been pretty liberal about fair use doctrine and what we can train the model on. But if you make the analogy to Bitcoin mining, you're right. You can just put it anywhere. I mean, because you see the miners
Yeah.
just chase low.
It's still a bit,
Low.
and I think it's more than an analogy. I think the kind of the folks that have invested in Bitcoin mining are probably also going to invest in, in AI farms as well. They're just GPU farms in a sense, and so
Right.
figuring out a cheap, economic way to operate a big fleet of GPUs, it's. I mean, I think there are differences, but there's some definite similarities there.
Yeah. No, and then you're right. And then when XYZ state or maybe even different country has the most liberal training rules out there, the end user will figure out, well, you can't use that language model when you're in the state of New York, or something to that effect.
Yeah. You could imagine it getting pretty complicated.
Yeah. No, that's wild. So now we've talked the past. Look into your crystal ball. What are we going to see happening on that front? Do we have Moore's law still going? I mean, it'll just keep getting better. It'll keep being more efficient, and maybe we're overblowing estimates for electricity, or even with Moore's law going, there's going to be so much demand for AI. I mean, I think when your best friend runs off with your girlfriend, you'd like Apple Music to just start playing, whatever by Hank Williams Jr. without thinking about it. But
well, it's a good question. I think first to Moore's law. Sometimes we wrap up a lot in that word, and literally Moore's law just speaks to doubling the number of transistors in a chip every couple of years. And, I think at least through 2030, that's, you can see a pretty clear path. We've talked about a 1 trillion transistor device by 2030. The technology gets increasingly exotic as you do that. But because there's such demand, and because the impact of improvements in semiconductors drives such important improvements, even if the improvements started to slow down, the value of them, I think, as you're scaling across so much of the economy, it gets higher and higher. So I think you're willing to keep investing, and maybe it isn't delivering the returns of 30 years ago, where you had Moore's law in terms of more transistors, but you also had another thing that us wonky people talk about called Dennard scaling. And Dennard is this, I think he was an IBM researcher, and he died just like a couple weeks ago, by the way. It's kind of
rest
him
in
and
peace.
Moore's law. Him and Gordon Moore die like kind of within a year of each other. But Dennard scaling was recognizing that not only that when the devices got smaller, they ran faster and consumed less power. And so you got like this amazing win, right? That every generation of technology, not only did you get more transistors, but the transistors were half the power and 70% faster. And that scaling has petered out, over time. So you don't get these outsized gains that you got 30 years ago, but you still get important gains. And that's why we spend even more than we ever spent before and build even more elaborate factories to do even more exotic technologies, because the value of it is still very strong. But there's some things that kind of cut against Moore's law saving you here. One thing is that, especially in AI, an increasing amount of the power is spent moving the data around. So you have, like on a GPU, you have this high bandwidth memory that's trying to get as much data into the chip, compute it, get it out, and then you have to connect those devices together with very high speed data networks. And then those devices have to be connected across rack to rack to rack through these very high speed networks. And all of that data movement and drives a lot of power consumption. So the amount of the power that's consumed moving the data around just gets bigger and bigger. So even if the computing part of the power consumption gets better and better, you've got to bring the cost of the moving the data around, or you have to find a more clever way to do it. So maybe you don't have to move the data around as much. So there's a lot of research in those different kinds of questions. But I don't think, just like in the cloud computing era, Moore's law alone didn't save you. And I don't think in the next generation of AI, Moore's law is going to save you either. But it's definitely essential. If you're not building more capable devices, you're not going to be able to keep improving. Now, one of the big debates, and this is kind of a crystal ball, and oftentimes not only is it one or the other, but maybe sometimes many things can be true, But there's a little bit of a debate between what's going to happen with the size of AI models. And so, some people believe that smaller models are going to capture more and more of the market because they're so much cheaper to operate, they consume less power. And then others are like, no, we're just going to build just every year, the size of the model's been going up 10x, by the way. That's been the trend. And so, like a chat GPT or whatever, maybe a trillion element model, and the next year it'll be 10 trillion, and then 100 trillion. And, and how long is that growth going to be? And maybe these uber powerful models can do every possible task. That's one future. The small model people believe, okay, I've got a good quality smaller model. Say it's only 70 billion or 100 billion. Like Meta has open source model called Llama 3. And anybody can use that open source model. Well, if you couple the smaller model, but with very focused data, you can also get a very good result. So if I'm building an application, I don't need it to do everything under the sun in the way that I might use ChatGPT. I can ask ChatGPT anything from poetry to history to, quantum mechanics. And, but if I'm building a business, maybe I'm Spotify. I just want, I just want to select music, and I have all this data. And can I apply all my data that's my private data? And can I just use kind of a standard model and work those two together? And there's two ways to do that. One is you can fine tune the model, which means you do additional training of an existing model, but you train it on very task specific data. Imagine maybe you're a finance department and you train it on your finance data so that you have something that can build financial reports that are very accurate. You don't need necessarily the giant model to do that. You just need to tune, a less capable model with the right data. And so that's one path. And another thing that's even simpler is a technology called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. And in the RAG use case, you just bring the data with the model. You don't change the model, just use the model, but with lots of specific data. So imagine it being like incredibly elaborate prompt engineering where you're just feeding the model your company's private data.
Right.
And then now you're going to get a far more accurate result, as long as you just keep it within the domain of where your data is. And so then you did all this work, you got something that's pretty good result, but you didn't need a nuclear power plant,
Right.
necessarily to train that model, right? So,
it's wild you bring that up, because literally what we've done around here at Digital Wildcatters over the last 6 to 9 months is we looked up and realized we had created all of this energy specific content. We went out, we built a RAG model.
Okay, so you've actually done it.
Yeah, well, I'm still an idiot. That's way above my pay grade in terms of learning this stuff. But when we make a query on Collide GPT, we've got 4 language models. On any given day, we'll use whichever one is the cheapest, whichever one's performing the best, whether that's Llama, whether that's ChatGPT or whatever. And then we get 4 answers, and then we use, I think we're using ChatGPT right now to choose the best answer. And it's hitting our database of energy specific stuff because we've got all our content in there. We've gone out, and I think we've got now 3,000 videos in there. We've scanned in textbooks, et cetera. You name it on kind of third-party curated energy stuff. And you're right, 80% of the time, if you ask an energy-specific question to Collide GPT, you get a better answer than Chat GPT, just because it's hitting this database of energy stuff, and we've tuned it to give preferences there.
And you protected your data. It's yours. That's your content, your value add. You don't want to give that away to train someone else's mega model. You want to keep that as your differentiation.
Exactly. So that's why potentially in the future, we're ripping down all our podcasts off YouTube where people can go scrape, and you're only going to be able to get that through Collide. And
there you go. And so there's an energy dimension to that exact thing you just did, right? So you open up the possibility of getting the result you need without continuing to grow the model size, and so therefore.
And this is interesting too, because we've also have the belief that ultimately no one's going to go to Collide GPT and say something like, "Can I put friction reducer in my mud?" And if you get the answer yes, okay, go ahead, boys. Actually, what we think people in the energy business are going to want to see is they're gonna want to see, yes, you can do it XYZ. Here's an answer. Oh, by the way, this comes from this SPE paper, because the engineer is going to want to go, there's this technical paper on that.
That's an idea I didn't think of, but now I'm going to actually go to some work. I'm not just going to.
Yeah. So we almost call it like advanced search is going to be more important in energy, because at the end of the day, just with health and safety concerns and the expense of drilling a well and the like size, Exxon's never going to have artificial intelligence trained on something they randomly found out on the internet. It's going to be Exxon specific data if they start using that stuff. So it's been fascinating to see. I'm jokingly running around telling everybody, yeah, we went from like podcast bros to a legit AI software company.
Just put .ai in your
in the fundraising
you'll work better. Yeah,
exactly. But now you're right. You're right to say that. So does Zane Ball have a belief on what shakes out in the future, or you just pose the question?
Well, I mostly am humble and pose the question. I know smart people that are very passionate about both sides of that. I think there's definitely both are going to exist. I mean, so I think there's going to be a whole spectrum of solutions, but that from an energy perspective, it's like, well, what becomes dominant, right? And I don't think people are going to slow down building mega models. I mean, I think they're going to just keep on going, right? I mean, people are investing like crazy. So what we see today is only, the beginning of what you're going to see in a year and 2 years, because the investments and the capital spending is off the chart, and people are racing to, advance these capabilities. And so they're not doing that because they don't believe that they're going to get something very special out of it. But we'll find out. I think the part for me that's the biggest wild card isn't so much the technology. I think people are going to build big models. They're going to do amazing things. But a little bit like the birth of the internet, at the beginning, it was obvious to everyone that it was going to be big, but it really wasn't obvious exactly how the money was going to be made. And I think there's some similarities here. I remember seeing my first web page in 1994, and thinking, that's cool. That's really going to be something. And, for the next 2 years, every company in the world was putting up websites, and, they didn't know why they were putting a website, but they're all just doing it. Right. And, it's not even that different reading about like the railroads in the 1850s or whatever. People were just building railroads everywhere, and they were right. It was going to be big, but it wasn't really clear how it was all going to work. And so, it wasn't until, you didn't get, Google until 1998, or you didn't get Facebook till 2005. You didn't really see how the industry was going to play out immediately. Right. So,
right.
So I think a lot depends on that, so these amazing models are going to be built. I assume they're going to be pretty profoundly useful for stuff, but how are they going to get paid for, and how often are they going to be used? And I think that will have some big energy implications.
So what are kind of other, aside from energy usage, that was interesting. I hadn't thought through the whole, if we become a world of RAG models versus super models, what other things are going to potentially impact energy stuff?
I think energy usage in AI is I think market forces are very powerful, right? So energy gets scarce. People are going to be very careful about how they use it. And AI is pretty immature, as amazing as it is. I think to what degree of all the genius data scientists of the world really deeply thought through the most energy efficient strategies for training or even inference, that I'm sure there's innovation to be had, and if there's one thing I think the history of the energy industry teaches us is that, when market forces come into play really powerfully, people innovate, right? They come up with different ideas, and so I do think the idea that you just have some sort of unsolvable problem with energy growth, either there'll be more innovation that gets us more energy, or there'll be more innovation that says we don't need as much energy. I think and there'll be some combination of the two. So I'm sure that these curves that project AI energy consumption are probably wrong. They're accurate in the sense, if you do the math on where we're going and what the current paradigm is, I'm sure those are good forecasts made by smart people. But I just have to believe there's game-changing innovation that's going to bring that curve down to size. I don't think we're going to get back to this flat scenario like we've been doing, because I think it is it is a massively more computationally intensive thing, but I'm incredibly optimistic that, given the right boundary conditions, the engineers figured stuff out. And they've done it again and again and again. And it'll just be interesting to see it's the race between the energy industry engineers and the techie engineers. Yeah. Who's gonna make the biggest dent on that problem? I bet they're both gonna make some pretty big dents on that problem.
Yeah. I think the issue in the energy business is we got beat up. I mean, the shale revolution for doubling oil production in the United States, natural gas production, like that. I mean, we literally went in a decade from building things to import natural gas because natural gas at $15 an M. To your point, innovation, boom. We've converted all those places to exporting natural gas
Amazing.
now because we've got so many of them. I think what I worry about though is so the shale revolution did all this amazing stuff, but we lost a lot of money and we in effect shrunk as an industry. And then we had COVID and we fired half the industry. And so the entrepreneurial spirit we used to have, at least part of it was we had a whole lot of people. And then number two was we had a whole lot of capital access that we just don't have today because we incinerated capital there for a while. And then you put kind of the green issues overlaying
Yeah.
all this stuff.
There's the uncertainty that you have to deal with in
Yeah.
terms of climate change and what the future regulatory environment is going to be. And
Exactly.
I think that is a really complicating factor. So if your plan is to sunset all of your fossil fuel plants when they expire, but you have to not only have sufficient renewables to replace that, you have to have sufficient renewables to account for this massive growth at the same time. It seems like
Yeah.
a pretty tough circle to
And
square.
we've never actually transitioned away from a fuel source. We burn more wood today on the planet than we've ever burned in our history. So I mean, it's always been addition. It hasn't ever been a transition away from something. So you put all that together, I just worry about our ability to be entrepreneurial enough to make the dent in it, as you said, versus we're going to cede that to technology because you guys still have a lot of capital behind you. You've got all the smart engineers, et cetera. And I worry, and this sounds bad. I'm making it sound territorial. I mean, at the end of the day, whoever does it, does it. But I worry that it gets ceded to the technology companies.
Maybe they become the source of capital.
Yeah.
You see them investing in, like these micronuclear power plants. Like they're definitely taking a strong interest
Yeah.
in understanding where their energy is going to come from because that
Yeah.
can cap their business. In fact, I think even right now, people are thinking very, very carefully about how they're going to secure power, where they're going to build those data centers, how they're going to secure their place in the future. And
That's why
they're not going to be passive about it. I wouldn't expect them to be super passive about it. There's a lot of money at stake and they have a lot of capability to invest. Yeah. These companies haven't typically left their fate to others.
No, that's very true. I mean, that's John Arnold, the world's greatest natural gas trader. That's why he's on the board of Meta now. Because Zuckerberg's like, we need to understand energy. So it's kind of crazy. So, kind of final thoughts. What else do we need to be thinking about when it comes to AI, data centers, power?
I guess we covered all my big thoughts. I think it's just going to be real interesting. I think we can talk a lot today, but I think there's a level of change and transformation going on that eclipses anything I've known in my 28 years
Yeah.
in the industry. So the opportunity for things to look very different than they look today in 5 years, for different companies to come on the scene or leave the scene, and big differences in business models. I think the way technology is now intersecting with energy and intersecting with geopolitics and government action in many areas, whether it's data sovereignty or energy policy or or whatnot. All of those things are significantly complicating the world. I kind of grew up in the age of globalization, and in the industry, and I never would have thought that and the tech industry is a very global, the chip industry in particular is a very global industry, right? Things are built in all kinds of parts of the world, and IPs developed in all different kinds of parts of the world. And we've just had it free flowing across the planet for the whole industry is structured that way. And now we're, dealing with a very different world where, things are shaping up to look different, and the equations are more complicated. I think we had the benefit in the last 20 years of just kind of having to do the engineering and finding the cheapest way to do things and to serve customers. And now you have to think about, a much more complicated world.
Yeah, no, that is crazy. Because the one thing I'm probably going to spend a lot of time on the podcast, I bet over the next year, is we have this running joke that if natural gas is going to be the fuel source for all of this, Monahans, Texas, which is out in West Texas.
Monahans is. My dad lives in Midland. So.
Oh, that's right. You know where Monahans is. Well, they're going to have to upgrade from having the Bennigans be the nicest restaurant if they want to entertain Intel executives out in West Texas.
So we're going to invest in a chain of high-end restaurants in West Texas. So maybe when the high-end vegan restaurants open in West Texas, we'll know a new world has come.
There was somebody took a Silicon Valley investor to Schneider, Texas, and they were at the Schneider Country Club, and supposedly the investor asked if there was a vegan menu, and they kind of stared at him, excuse us, but anyway.
I was just in Midland a couple of weeks ago visiting my dad, and my brother was there too, and we had Sunday lunch at the Wall Street Bar and Grill in downtown Midland, and I can only imagine the deals that have shaped the industry that have been struck at the very table we sat at. So that was fun.
Used to sell you the steak for the price of oil, whatever a barrel of oil was back in the day. So, well, Zane, you were cool to come on to do this, and even more importantly, you were cool to come see Mom and Dad last night.
It's been a pleasure.